Welcome to the EUCannaJobs Potcast. We're excited to have you with us as we explore the latest happenings in the European cannabis industry with people from the industry. I'm your host, Andy Mansfeld, founder of EUCannaJobs. We connect European cannabis companies with people looking for employment in the industry, whether they're new to the industry or industry veterans. Today we have an exciting guest, Ben Stevens, with us. He's the editor at Business of Cannabis. So he's very much up to date on what's happening in the European cannabis industry. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, Ben.
Thanks so much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure.
Our pleasure. And thanks everyone else who's joining us. So Ben, tell me a bit about your background. I know you're in London, but you've been in the industry for a while. How did you first come to be involved?
I fell into it, really. It was just a lucky break. I've been in journalism most of my sort of working life, and got pretty tired of writing about retail, which I was in before. And just came across this job with Prohibition Partners and have just sort of run with it ever since. It's been great. It's an amazing industry to work in, as I'm sure you'd agree.
Yeah, definitely very interesting, especially nowadays. But when did you join Business of Cannabis?
2021, towards the end.
Okay.
So 2 or 3 years, but in this industry, that's quite a long time.
Yeah, especially on this side of the ocean, when it's pretty new. I did notice on LinkedIn, I looked earlier because I wasn't sure how long Business of Cannabis has been around, and I saw it's been around since 2017. So they've been around since kind of the beginning when countries first started doing some medical cannabis legalization stuff. So that's interesting. What are some of the changes you've noticed just since you've been in?
Oh, so much. I mean, I think when I joined, it was kind of the tail end of the first green rush. So lots of companies were going public. Lots of companies were getting acquired by bigger companies. We had the massive GW Pharma getting bought by Jazz Pharma deal, which was huge for the UK. And I guess after that, with the sort of global financial crisis that we had, it all turned around kind of on a dime. Suddenly, it was very difficult to find any cash. Lots of companies have either sort of retreated from cannabis or retreated from certainly the public markets. And I guess towards the beginning of this year and tail end of 23, that kind of started to turn around again. It seemed like the sort of industry bottomed out, as it were. Valuations got to the lowest point. People sort of learned their lessons from the initial green rush, and these overvaluations were seen for what they are. And there was a lot of progress regulatorily. That's a word. And with companies that had kind of made it through that slump, suddenly finding that that they had a good reputation, good market share, and they really understood what they were doing by that point. So it's difficult to say what's going to happen next, but it kind of seems like after that progress, with the amount of elections that are going on this year, I think 2024 has the most elections that we've had in the 21st century. It seems like there's now a little bit of pushback on the progress that has been made over the last couple of years, certainly across Europe. North America is a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Definitely, we're seeing that a lot of countries are starting to say that they either want to reverse course or at least stop the progress they've been making. Here in Germany, certainly the conservatives are threatening to reverse everything, which I think is unlikely to happen. Because even if the conservatives come in, they're not going to have full control all by themselves. They'll have to form a coalition and they're not going to find partners probably who want to follow
No,
that.
I've been told the same about Germany, in that, you know, even if it does swing to the right, which is kind of widely expected, it's going to be very difficult to roll back on what's
Right.
gone so far. But it probably does mean, you know, Pillar 2 is looking increasingly less likely, from what I understand. But yeah, again, that's all up in the air. It's very hard to predict, considering all
Yeah.
the twists and turns that happened to get Kanji through in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. And it'll be interesting to see, though, I mean, the German government is still talking about getting the recreational private pilot project, off the ground before the end of the year. I think it's very unlikely, and some people in the government are starting to admit that it's just not going to happen. But we'll see. I mean, the legal framework is now law, so there's nothing to say that even if the conservatives get control of the federal government, that state governments, which are have a more liberal or left-leaning government, couldn't still take that federal law and move forward on their own.
Yeah.
So that there could be some surprises still coming the next year or two, where everyone's thinking, "Oh, we're just going to have to sit still and nothing's going to progress." Maybe that won't be the case, because right now I think there's 25 municipalities, cities who have said they want to do it. So legally, in theory, they can work on this without the federal government really having a legal reason to say no, you can't do it, because the law is there.
Yeah, I also think, given that Switzerland have basically done a Pillar 2 already,
Yep.
It's going to be a lot easier I mean, not getting it through, that's down to politics, but in terms of, you know, having a ready-made framework that they can say, this is how we do it, this is how it works, this is how we don't bump up against
Right.
international law, probably works in its favor. But again, yeah, it's difficult to see what's going to happen. It really all depends, as with, you know, France, as we've seen in Italy, and the US. It's, you know, sadly become quite a political issue,
Right.
because it's so easy. You know, it's such a drugs are bad. It's such an easy line,
Right.
that people assume is going to get them votes. So yeah, it's disappointing, but I think that's probably always going to be the case with cannabis, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the good thing also, you mentioned the Swiss pilot projects, recreational sales projects, and they're going well. They've already got some preliminary data coming out of those showing positive results, no real negative effects. It's working well for the people who are involved, etc. So, if people want to say, "Oh, but look how bad this would be," there's no proof it would be bad. And if you look at the U.S. and Canada, also hasn't been bad there. Sure, the industries have taken a beating recently, as far as financially, economically, but as far as causing widespread mayhem and deaths on the road and children in rehab, all those skies falling predictions, none of them came true in North America. So I mean, there's plenty of evidence now to show that legalization of or opening up recreational markets doesn't cause societal issues. It actually fixes or helps a lot of things. So,
Yeah, and I think we've seen over the last year probably that countries, certainly in the EU, are learning that having the argument of, you know, protection of health and protection of people is the kind of route to go down. You know, you've seen this a lot in the Czech Republic, who are the last remaining EU state trying to get a recreational market. That is kind of the strategy to go down, where you can not circumvent, because that kind of suggests that there's some wrongdoing, or, you know, you're trying to find loopholes in the law, but it's the most effective way of kind of arguing against the limitations of international EU law. So
Yeah.
and also, you know, it's the Czech Republic will be really interesting to see what the European Commission or the EU does, you know, if they just sort of go for it, and as they did with hemp, right, raising the THC limit to 1%, which they just kind of did and said, you know, if the EU wants to push back on this, then we'll deal with that when it comes. You know, it's kind of policy of ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So, you know, if they manage to do it, I think that may give a little bit of hope or optimism for other countries to give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure what their plans are. I mean, it seems like every week there's a different article that comes out about what Czech Republic's going to do, but it would be great if they did try and push forward with it, and put a little pressure on the EU to say.
Yeah, as far as I understand, that's still the case. They're still going for it. It's again just kind of stuck in the politics right now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not fully up to date on it. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah. So what's going on in the UK though? I mean, you're there in London. I mean, UK and Germany are, I think, the two biggest markets for medical currently, and both growing quite quickly. A lot of other smaller countries are growing quickly, but just don't have the volume that UK and Germany do. But what's going on with the UK? Are they talking about recreational on the government level, or?
No, we're nowhere near that, unfortunately. But we do have a fair, you know, I'd say thriving medical market, but it's completely private. So, you know, there are prescriptions on the NHS, but it's for things like Epidiolex, and it's quite difficult to get. And you know, you need to go through quite a lot of loopholes and rigmarole to be able to get prescribed that. Today, actually, or this week, there's been a few stories that some new clinical trials are happening, which could help. So that everybody says that the reason that cannabis isn't available on the NHS, certainly the government do, is that there's a lack of reliable clinical data, or a lack of reverse control trials, which is kind of the gold standard for getting stuff approved by the NHS. So this has kind of been touted as I mean, it's positive. We've been waiting for these since 2021, I think, when they were first announced. But the actual structure of it is fairly problematic in that it's looking at isolates instead of full spectrum CBD for the treatment of epilepsy in children. So that you know, they miss out a lot of, you know, they kind of miss the point in how beneficial full spectrum can be in treating these conditions. And also, it's just the whole problem with RCTs is that you need a control group. So you have to take these kids who have this life-saving medicine off it for, in this case, 8 weeks, which of course is really dangerous and horrible to do. So I think there was a lot of hope that with our recent election, things would open up a little bit. We'd have a little bit more of a sensible conversation with the government around cannabis policy or drug policy in general. There doesn't seem to be much yet in the way of sort of promising conversations around that, as far as I am aware, but it's very early days. You know, they've got a lot to sort out in this country, and sadly, as with many places around the world, cannabis just isn't top of the list. So progress is slow. The market's still growing pretty quickly. I think prescription items doubled for the last 2 years. I think we have roughly, it depends who you ask, around 50 to 60,000 patients, which compared to, Germany is pretty tiny. And it's way below the sort of general estimate of about 2% of the population who would be able to benefit from medical cannabis. And I think that is largely down to, as with everywhere, a lack of education, lack of knowledge. A lot of people don't know that it's available. Something like 80% of people aren't aware that medical cannabis is available. But there are restrictions on advertising, so it's very hard to get the word out to people.
Right.
Which is really what clinics are struggling with at the moment, I guess. So it's just a kind of a drive to try and get the cannabis naive, I guess, into the market rather than fighting over this 50 or 60,000 patients.
What about, is any physician there able to prescribe or only certain ones?
No, I think you need to be a specialist. It's certainly not. It's not any GP. It's not like it is now in Germany.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the big changes. Good changes that happened with the CanG law here in Germany was that when they took it off the narcotics list, that kind of got rid of a lot of these restrictions almost automatically. I mean, it had to be still written in there, but kind of the logic I think was, or the way I understood it is, if you're saying it's not a narcotic, it's just being treated like a regular medication, then why is it going to be restricted to specialists and so on? So kind of a lot of these restrictions fell away, and you saw a huge increase in the number of patients who were able to get prescriptions pretty much overnight. Then you also saw these, telemedicine clinics and things like that opening up, and so there's a ton of new clinics that are just prescribing cannabis, which I think is also what's kind of happening in the UK, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, not only does it mean you don't have to have the crazy overheads of having a physical center for people to go, but yeah, it really opens up access and means that, as a prescribing doctor, you have much more ability to reach people, often with multiple clinics.
Right.
But I mean, similar to Germany, because it's kind of so widespread and this telehealth thing is taking off, there's talk of a bit of a pushback and a little bit of a sort of re-looking at how the industry works from authorities. I think in Germany, you could probably tell me better than I would know, but that seems to be a lot more formal, and it seems like there's a lot of politicians or industry sources making noise about, pulling back on the sort of med rec industry where people are accused of using the framework to basically get cannabis for recreational purposes.
Yeah.
In the UK, I've heard that is happening, but again, it depends who you ask. I've been told that there's been conversations with the MHRA, which is the kind of regulatory body overseeing it, that they are kind of looking to crack down. There was a report out recently that kind of suggested it's worth looking at. But whether, again, due to the amount of stuff that needs to be sorted out with the NHS and the country in general, how much of a priority that is remains to be seen, and whether this is more hearsay and conversations happening in back rooms rather than something that's going to make it into actual policy kind of remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think it's similar here in Germany. You're definitely hearing about pushback, and reading about, that government people, other conservatives are upset at the rapid spread of these telemedicine clinics. But probably not that much appetite to actually do much about it, or capacity to do that much about it. Plus, I think it would also be somewhat difficult. I mean, there are rules. These are physicians who are following the rules. They're prescribing in good faith based on what patients are telling them. And now you're going to have a government body come in and say, well, you shouldn't have prescribed to that person. And now, in theory, the government would have to go in and prove that all these prescriptions are fake by dragging these patients and questioning them somehow, to somehow get to the point that they can say so and so many people shouldn't have gotten it, which will just be another person's opinion. So I think it gets very messy very quickly, and very persecutorial, if that's the right word, of these patients, most of whom are probably legitimate. I agree. There's going to be some people in there who are getting it for recreational purposes, but it's a fine line. There was a recent survey here in Germany which showed that something like it was over 90%. I don't know if it's 95, but it was 90 to 95% of patients, or might have even been a little bit over 95. I don't remember exactly. Percent of people using cannabis said they use it actually for medical purposes. Which that number seemed way too high to me. But I think part of it is, depends on how you define it. If you say, are people taking it to help them relax, and if that's considered medical potentially, then okay. Or if they're using it to help them sleep, it depends on how broadly you define that, I think. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think these kind of arguments over med and rec and who's using it for what, it kind of totally misses the point in that, even if they are accessing it for so-called recreational purposes, you're still taking that money out of the black market. You're still giving them much safer access to safe cannabis that exactly what's in, that you can track. You're still funding businesses that essentially want to help patients and improve the quality of life of people that are going to take cannabis anyway. So yeah, I think it's kind of, it's easy to get caught up in semantics with this, but whether the intended purpose of legalizing medical was to take people away from the black market or not, it certainly does. And I think that's an argument which is solemnly made in government circles, certainly in the UK, I think.
Yeah.
Less so Germany.
I mean, I think there's one difference between here and the UK would be, that some people would point out probably is that, it is covered by insurance around 50% of the time here in Germany. And some of the laws or regulations that the government was looking at was to try and make it more difficult for insurance companies to deny the medical cannabis claims. So some people might try and make the argument, say, well, now people are getting their recreational cannabis paid for by insurance companies. But I also don't have of course, in theory, that's not the best idea, but I actually don't have that big of a problem with it. Once you look at that study I mentioned a minute ago, where people who are using it, they say they're using it for medical purpose, even if it isn't prescribed by a physician, or maybe it's, like I said, for sleep or something. But I mean, who's to make that call in the end? Certainly not the government. That's what I would say.
So I know that they have changed or are looking to change the rules in Germany in terms of insurance. As far as I understand it, doctors will still be liable for, I think it's called recourse or redress, where if it turns out to be a sort of bogus or not fully legitimate prescription, the doctor will be liable to pay out those costs anyway. So I think to some extent that really mitigates the danger of people just getting recreational, in inverted commas, cannabis for free off their insurance, really.
Yeah. And, in the end, at least in the U.S., when it was first all medical, people, all they had to do was go online and look up, what do I need to say to get my prescription, and go in and say, I've got chronic pain. It came from this and this and this, what I've done, and it's been this long. Yeah, I mean, anyone can tell a story. And then it's documented, and there you go. So I don't know if that's what's happening here, but I don't think it's super difficult for people to go online and figure out ways around things. Not that I'm suggesting people do that. But, I mean, I think people are savvy enough nowadays that they already understand how to use the internet and figure out how to work your systems without me having. Now that I said it, that people are going to be like, "Oh, I can go do that."
Yes, I think it's a little bit more different in the UK. I think you need to prove that you have been prescribed drugs by your GP for whatever condition you're looking for medical cannabis for, whether that's insomnia or chronic pain or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to show that these haven't worked, or well, you need to be able to prove that you've been prescribed them and you're still having issues.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty high bar, and certainly that's going to limit the number of prescriptions, which that's the system, so that's fine, I guess. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens here over the next couple of years. Certainly with the elections coming up, like you said, tons of elections coming up across Europe. A lot of countries, if not almost every country, is leaning for more conservative. So we'll see where we end up. But I mean, I feel good that good progress has been made in the last few years. I mean, it's been more than a few years. It's been 7-8 years in many countries since medical first started happening, and certainly in the last couple of years, a lot of progress on other fronts. So it'll be very interesting to continue to see how all this kind of progresses.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you read earlier today that Kamala Harris has said that if she gets in, she will federally legalize. Which, I mean, obviously, it's becoming an increasingly important issue in the election, which is really interesting. And whether that is viable or not, I'm no expert on American politics, but I think it will need bipartisan support. So I think that's going to be quite hard to get through. If it does, though, I think that's going to change cannabis around the world. I think suddenly these companies that had these grand plans, North American MSOs and such, back in 2018 to sort of expand, and everything was kind of predicated on federal legalization. Suddenly that'll be a reality. Money will flow in, cross state commerce can happen. That will change an awful lot over there, and I think inevitably have a knock-on effect over here, if not only in sentiment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, first of all, I think it definitely could get through if the president, puts it, really wants it through. I think it will go through, because even most of the red states, Republican states, are passing medical cannabis laws now. So, so the Republicans, it used to be Republicans were staunchly anti-cannabis. They aren't anymore. I think it's a money grab kind of thing for them, but whatever the reason or reasons, it's just no longer a red-blue kind of issue there. If you look at the public support, the vast majority of Democrats are for it, and a high percentage of a majority of Republicans are also for it. I don't know what the latest numbers are. It's not like it's 51% are for and 49 against. It's more like 70+% of Republicans are also in support across the country. So, it's of course, each individual state's going to be a little bit different, but in general, it's not something that's going to hurt Republican politicians for supporting it.
No, exactly. And sort of as you were saying earlier about, having real world evidence that it doesn't mean the country falls apart. It doesn't mean people are dying and crashing their cars all over the place. It's getting so in the US, where you can cross the state in most places and just get cannabis in kind of corner shop. It's getting increasingly hard to argue against at least relaxing rules.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. That you can cross the state line, buy it, come back, and you might get arrested at the state line because because you just came across the state line. But people are still doing it, and that just doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like gambling and things like that have been an issue in the U.S. also, where once one state does it, it just takes a little while before the neighboring states start to do it. So like, well, all of our citizens are going over there and leaving their money there, when if they spend that money in our own state, we get the tax benefits out of it instead of sending the money to someone else. Might as well keep the money here because they're doing it either way.
Absolutely.
Which, I mean, is one of the big points of prohibition anyway, not working for cannabis. I mean, people are going to smoke cannabis whether it's legal or not. Well,
you'd think that would have got into people's heads by this point, but
apparently not. So switching topics a little bit. So we work with companies and people who are trying to get in the industry. For you, it was pretty easy. It sounds like when you were looking at switching one journalism job for another, this kind of fell in your lap.
Yes. I think I got lucky though. It's still pretty niche. You need to. I came in without any cannabis experience, and was lucky enough to be able to sort of learn the ropes myself and kind of get supported in doing that. But there's very few publications or sort of journalists who are able to do that. A lot of my industry colleagues either work for free, they run their own business, they're freelance. It's quite. I know that I'm very lucky to have the position I do. But yeah, it's still, because it's compared to the US or Canada, it's still in the EU. It's a very small market in comparison. So the businesses that are hiring or are still have the money to expand, which again after the last few years is less than it was when a lot of companies had lots of investment and sort of were expanding faster than they are now. I think it's very difficult because you need the experience to get the experience. It's that sort of. I mean, what's your take on that? How do you introduce the market?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and obviously I get this question from candidates almost daily. How can they get in when they're coming from a different industry? And even here right now, companies are saying, no, I need someone with previous experience in cannabis, which I don't think always makes a lot of sense personally. I mean, I think if you're looking for someone in sales, it makes more sense to find someone who can kick ass in sales and can sell snow to someone in the sell sand to someone in the desert or snow to someone in the Arctic. Basically, find those kind of salespeople, and then they can learn cannabis. It's the way I would look at it. But companies, for the most part, are saying, I want someone with cannabis experience. So it makes it difficult. There just aren't enough people with cannabis experience in Europe to fill all the open jobs in cannabis. It's not possible. So, but I think people can do things to up their cannabis credentials a little bit. Spending time on the different social medias. LinkedIn is a good one because they don't really discriminate against cannabis companies. And there's all kinds of cannabis groups where people can join on LinkedIn or in other social media group things also, and start joining conversations, start networking, getting to know people, going to cannabis events. It doesn't really show up on your resume per se or your CV, but you make connections and start networking. And still nowadays, networking is where majority of jobs are filled. So it's a great way for people to also meet people, but also just to understand what's going on, get to know the industry. Because if you do get an interview, even though your CV might not show direct cannabis experience, at least if you can sit there and have a conversation and demonstrate that you know what's going on in the industry and that you're very tuned in and knowledgeable, that will make a big difference. But it is still difficult to get that interview if you don't have some kind of cannabis experience, unfortunately.
Yeah, sadly. And I agree. I think, obviously it's such a fast moving industry. By the time you get the interview and actually have it, there's probably 100 things have changed. But that immediately will put you ahead of so many candidates. When we're looking for journalists, sort of even basic knowledge of the industry is a big leg up on sort of having to learn it from scratch.
Right. But like you just mentioned, things do change so fast. The laws and regulations change so fast. Another reason, it's helpful, but it's not critical that someone has all that knowledge, because literally if they've been on vacation for 2 months or gone for a couple of months or were on family leave for a new baby for a few months, things could have changed, and they have to relearn things anyway. So I'm always a big believer in finding people who are a good fit for the company, and then you can teach them basic things. And cannabis is obviously everyone had to learn it from somewhere. No one was born with cannabis knowledge. So
very true.
So it's that chicken and egg thing that is difficult right now in the industry. And there aren't any huge, great things you can do. There are courses people can take, but also that's limited in how much that substitutes for actually having worked in the industry.
True, but I think, from what I hear, there's a real focus on education from across the board at the moment. Lots of companies are saying that this is becoming a priority, or certainly it's a new project that they're taking on, because they recognize, not just for doctors and trying to get the medical community to understand a little bit more about cannabis and ultimately expand its access, but for everyone, for people who just want to learn about it and learn about the industry, it seems to be picking up.
Yeah, that is a very common theme that people are talking about, and obviously it's important for the people working in it, but also like you mentioned, physicians and things like that. But it's interesting because the knowledge is what used to be considered basic knowledge is changing quickly. What exactly is entourage effect, or how much are the terpenes involved? And that's an ongoing discussion where there's a lot of research being done to try and help figure out, terpenes and the minor cannabinoids and all these different things, which ones really are involved, which ones aren't. There's no clear answer, but there's the amount of knowledge out there is growing quicker than a human probably can actually absorb it all. So I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of educational programs are coming up. Something that we have looked at here at EUCannaJobs, doing our own educational part, but we just don't have the time to take on something like that right now because it is so much information out there, and trying to stay on top of it. I feel like that's a full-time job right there for several people to stay on top of all the knowledge and condense it down into something that can be taught to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we've been talking for a while now. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you're busy also. Any final words? Well, and also if people want to get in touch with you, how can people do that?
Through the website Business of Cannabis, we have there should be a few email addresses on how to contact us. If you have any stories, if you have any questions, we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. We also have a couple of events coming up that would, as we talked about, if you want to learn a little bit about the industry or you're interested in just meeting some people, getting to know what's kind of what everybody's talking about. We have Business Cannabis New York in the 12th of November, where obviously we'll be talking about New York specifically and what's going on there, but the sort of wider changes in the US. That's going to be interesting because it's so close to the election.
Yeah.
And we have Berlin, Business Cannabis Berlin on the 26th of November. So similar deal, but in what's going on in Germany. So two very exciting markets and lots going on at both.
Yeah, and I can highly recommend their events. I've been to a few of them for sure, and always good. So, well, thank you very much, Ben, for your time. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. I hope everyone enjoyed hearing from Ben Stevens and Business of Cannabis. So if you want to follow us on LinkedIn or on our other socials, you can also sign up for our newsletter at our website, EUCannaJobs.com, of course. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Until next time, I'm Andy Mansfeld, wishing you a great day, and stay informed, stay connected, and keep exploring the world of cannabis.